Well, let's take a look back at the week in politics, and what a week it's been. Former Liberal Immigration Minister Amanda Vanstone joins us from Adelaide.
And also with us is Chris Schacht, former Senator for the Labor Party. They're both with us in Adelaide. Great to have you both on board. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Look, can we start off with that top story of ours today, which is, of course, that there'll be this High Court challenge now to at least one aspect of the Malaysia deal. Amanda Vanstone, your government went through a few of these. Great criticism of your government during the most heated time of the asylum seeker debate and, of course, legal challenges. The government says it's quite sure in its legal advice that it'll be found to be okay. Do you reckon it will be all right?
Well, I might not have said quite sure if I was Kevin Rudd. Look, this is a very, very difficult situation. Government isn't about a whiteboard on which you paint the ideal world. It's about making tough decisions when quite often you don't want to make either of the choices, but you have to make one or the other. Now, we made the decision that we wanted to protect Australia's borders. We wanted our refugees to come in from camps through the UNHCR. That's a bipartisan policy to support refugees coming from camps. And therefore we would have to close off the boats. To do that, we did two things: had the Pacific solution and temporary protection visas. Now, we were criticised uphill and down dale, and in some times the debate became very personal. Labor said, well, we're not going to do that, we're going to bring everyone on shore and process them quickly. It was a dream that was never going to work because the boats started up again. And now this government is facing those difficult decisions about what to do. Having criticised Nauru, I can understand they don't want to go back there, but, you know, every which way you turn, the Malaysian solution seems to have problems.
Chris Schacht, did the government err by announcing the Malaysia deal before hammering out these potentially destructive fine details?
Well, you're either damned if you don't give early information about a new policy, about a new development, and if you hang on it too long, someone says you're trying to hide it. You bring it out early, the principle, and then they say you haven't got the fine print done properly. All governments from time to time get accused of one way or the other. The real issue here is if there's going to be a challenge in the High Court, it won't be the first time that there is a challenge in the High Court on laws or a Labor or Liberal government on refugee and immigration policy. And one thing I will predict, it won't be the last. This will be an ongoing issue.
Well, that's an easy prediction.
Oh, but it is an easy prediction. It's easy to predict.
I'm with him on that.
I can predict. I don't think the Crows are going to win the football match tonight. That's a pretty easy prediction. But this is just a debate that is going to go on. Every government is going to take flack. There's no argument between the two major parties. There has to be a form of processing that when people arrive, no matter how they arrive, and claim to be a refugee under the UN definition of a well-founded fear of prosecution, you have to process them to make sure that you know who you're getting. The issue is, how is that done? How long does that take?
Yes,
One thing is for certain, there are some people in the community who basically just says, if you get to our shore, claim you're a refugee, you should be let in immediately. No of the two major parties agree with that. We are now arguing over which is the best detail, how to handle it. Whichever way we go, there are not easy black and white choices. A lot of it is very grey.
Sure, look, but
Virginia and Michael,
go on.
Can I give you an example of a problem? I mean, the opposition raised the issue of, well, what about unaccompanied minors? And that's caused problems for the government. Michael Keenan, I think he's the member for Stirling, raised an issue the other day. He said, well, you know, will Malaysia take 800 people who come without documents and who refuse to assist in the identification process? In other words, will they take under 800 people and they don't know who they are?
Yep.
Now, my guess is the answer to that is no. So, you know what people smugglers will do? Because this is a business that makes millions of dollars, they'll just tell everybody, look, chuck your papers overboard, don't cooperate, and then you won't go to Malaysia.
Germany has a very interesting approach to this, which has taken relatively recently, which is if you turn up to, and of course Germany, you know, has many, many more refugees turning up on all its borders than we do. If you turn up without papers, that's it. We're going to send you straight back to where you came from. You have to be able to tell us where you are, who you are. But if we can process you quickly and find out who you are, determine your identity, that you're not a security risk and you're not a health risk, we'll let you into the population generally. You can earn some money money, you can pay tax while we actually establish the legitimacy of your refugee claims. Why is that such a hard thing for either side of politics to do here in Australia? Amanda Vanstone?
Well, it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing in practice for any government to do. Put the politics aside. Just go back to the first proposition. If you come here and you don't say who you are, we're going to send you back to where you came from. Hello? Someone who doesn't want to go back won't tell you where they came from, or they won't give you sufficient ID. And it's all very well to say we're going to send you back. You've got to land a plane in the country. You've got to have permission to offload the person. So it's not so easy to send people back when they refuse to assist in the identification process. We had some people, and, Shotty's lot were complaining, they'd been in detention a long time. Why? Because we couldn't find out who they really were. And I can remember one situation with one government who said, look, he says he's one of ours, but we don't know about him, and you can't show that he is, so we're not having him. So this idea of, we'll just send you back if you come without papers, good luck with that.
Well, all I can say is Angela Merkel in Germany, if that's what... This is a political issue in Germany with her own supporters, I suspect, in a section of the community. She said a very simple line, or her government has, and it can't be delivered, because Amanda just said, if you arrive in Germany from Bulgaria or Serbia or Moldova or somewhere and don't tell them any information, they can't send them back because they don't know where they came from.
And we're in the same, pardon the pun, boat.
We like puns on this program, Amanda Vanstone.
Well, one of us does.
Now, if we can get to the issue that has got the key independents all steamed up, and that is the government's announcement that it plans to spend $12 million advertising its eventual carbon tax scheme. Amanda Vanstone, it's a bit rich for Tony Abbott to have a go at this, given the truckloads of taxpayer money Liberal government spent on advertising work cover and GST and the like.
Well, don't forget, it was the current government then in opposition that was extremely critical of money being spent advertising a government position. I think what I understand from the limited news I've seen of a couple of the independents is they're upset because they're pretty much saying, well, what position are you advertising? I mean, the notion generally of a carbon tax, they don't think there's enough detail there, last I saw anyway. So, look, governments do have to get their message out, I accept that, but what is the message?
Chris Schacht?
My view is, after a long time of long before I was in the Senate and that I was a party official, every time a government, Labor or Liberal, in office got a wonderful idea, we're going to have a paid television program to explain our policies, I soon learned it was not worth the trouble. The controversy that takes place over the advertising campaign usually does more damage to you than what you're advertising about. I think I think there should be a blanket ban on it until the legislation is passed and becomes active in the community. Like the bill has been signed, the legislation is the law of the land. Then I think it is reasonable for advertisements to explain to people from time to time what that means as an obligation to for the citizen. But I just think any of these ads usually give what a wonderful idea, got out of bed, let's do one. I think it gives you a lot more trouble and does you more damage than good in the end.
How do you see this entire discussion going? We had Tony Windsor on the program earlier this morning, and here was his phlegmatic, practical self as ever, saying, look, we're trying our best in this multi-party committee. I don't know if we're going to come to an agreement, and I guess the government might push on with legislation nonetheless. How do you see them managing that very fractious and difficult group of people, all of whom have very different interests in the issue when it comes to putting a carbon tax in place? Amanda Vanstone?
Well, it's obviously proving extraordinarily difficult. I mean, it was about a year ago that Julia Gillard whipped out the knife, or at least was prepared to put her hand on the knife that someone else whipped out, disposed of a Prime Minister, saying that she would help the Labor Party find its way because under her Deputy Prime Ministership it had lost its way, fix up the mining tax and fix up the boats. Well, none of that's happened. So, and she said before the election we wouldn't have a carbon tax. Now she's got an incredibly difficult situation to manage, as incidentally have the Greens and Independents. I mean, they're all entitled to their views, but that's what you get when you get minority government. A very, very difficult circumstance and a government unable to do entirely as it wants and therefore able to say to the people, well, we wanted something different, but we couldn't do it. The Greens saying they wanted something different, but they couldn't do it. Nobody ends up being happy. I mean, it could be that Tony Abbott's right. Let's have an election and sort it out and get a government that can govern in its own right, and therefore avoid these tremendous difficulties of bringing disparate groups together.
I think there's been great overstatement about the difficulty, with all due respect to Amanda, about this government. I actually saw a piece in the Fin Review yesterday, I think it was, where from a speech that Julia gave 2 days ago, she pointed out since the last election and the minority government status, 112 pieces of significant legislation have been put to the Parliament in Australia by the so-called minority government, and every one of them has been carried, some with amendment, like there are always amendments accepted, but she then pointed out no amendment was carried without the agreement of the government. And I suspect after a lot of argy-bargy in the next 6 months, 9 months, there will be a carbon tax. It will be agreed to. The Greens will say it didn't go far enough. Some independents will say it went too far. The opposition won't vote for it. I suspect it'll get through the lower house by 1 vote, and it'll get through the upper house by several votes, because after July the 1st, the Greens and the government have a majority between themselves. And I think the same will occur on a number of other issues. And just to give you an example, remember the tax that they introduced to pay for the floods in Queensland? This was going to be terrible. It wouldn't go through. It went through. It's now the law of the land. The money's going to be collected and will be paid for flood rehabilitation in the eastern states of Australia. So despite all the argy-bargy, the government is still governing. This shouldn't be a surprise. Over the last 20 years, most state governments in Australia, Labor or Liberal, have governed for a full term from a minority position by agreement with some independents. So it's not a surprise, and people should just get on with the job. My view is the government will go almost its full 3 years.
Okay, big call, Chris Schacht. Now, our time is fast running short, but I'd like to get both of your points of view on how the government has handled the live cattle export issue with Indonesia. Chris Schacht, starting with you.
Well, again, it's a classic. You've got the animal rights people, which have got a broad support in the community, saying ban it all, ban all live exports for everywhere. Then you've got the cattle industry, the agricultural industry saying, don't, this is too economically important, particularly in Northern Australia, which is true, several $100 million. I think the government has now moved, as I understand it, from a decision from the PLP on Tuesday in Canberra to look at assessing one by one the abattoirs in Indonesia, and they will be, once they meet certain requirements, will be given a licence again. But I think what clearly is going to have to happen for all sides of politics, you do have to monitor the performance of foreign abattoirs where our live animals go, because in the community now for 30 years there have been committees of the Senate, there have been debates about the treatment of live animals, and there is a large support across the board in the community that is sensitive to how they're treated. All
right, Amanda Vanstone, can I get your response? There's been some criticism that perhaps the official or senior government members and the minister responsible in particular hasn't actually been over there on the spot visiting in Indonesia. Is that a crucial part of it? Kevin Rudd was arguing this morning, look, you don't have to be there on the ground. We were in conversation and contact with them immediately. Does that sort of thing matter?
Well, look, I understood the minister had been there and had not gone to see facilities, but
on an earlier
don't
visit.
Put too much on that. He wouldn't have been taken to the bad ones anyway, so let's not get too carried away about that. I think the trade probably will start again to abattoirs that have been monitored. The real issue for the cattle industry, from my perspective here, is they need to look at their own industry and say, look, you know, if you knew about this, you should have done something about it.
Absolutely
you can't keep saying, oh, we didn't know. You damn well should have known. And if the cattle industry wants to keep the live cattle trade going, they've got a responsibility to make sure that it is in accordance with our requirements. And if they don't want to live up to that responsibility, then they face the risk of these sort of bans. And the revulsion of any Australian that I've met that saw that TV coverage. It's just not what we're on about. It's not what Australians are prepared to agree to. And if the cattle industry leadership doesn't understand that and doesn't do something about it, well, you know, my advice to the cattle industry is get in there and change your leadership.
Or go to another industry.
Uh-oh. Now that opens up an entirely different front. Look, really great to speak to you both this morning. Chris Schacht, Amanda Vanstone, thanks for joining us. We hope we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.